Welcome to episode 3 of the Random NASCAR Driver Podcast. This week, our random number generator brings us to 1974, race number 14 at Riverside International Speedway, and we're looking at the 25th place finisher, the King, Richard Petty. In this episode, we're going to take a look at the 1974 season, Riverside International Raceway, talk about the race a little bit, look into Richard Petty's career, his team Petty Enterprises, as well as look up information about the 43 car and STP as a sponsor throughout the history of NASCAR. The 1974 season championship would end up being won by the subject of this episode, Richard Petty. This championship was his 5th out of 7. The Rookie of the Year award would go to Earl Ross. Ross competed in 21 of 30 races and ended his season with 1 win, 5 top 5s, 10 top 10s, 127 laps led, and finished 8th in the final point standings. The Most Popular Driver award would go to Richard Petty. This would be his 5th out of 9 Most Popular Driver awards. Petty would also compete in all 30 races this season and end up with 10 wins, 22 top 5s, 23 top 10s, 7 poles, and 3,100 laps led. Race 14 would be held on June 9th at Riverside International Raceway in Riverside, California. This was a 138-lap race and won by third-place qualifier Cal Yarborough in his number 11. He beat Bobby Allison in his number 12 by 2.7 seconds, and these would also be the only drivers left on the lead lap. 37 drivers would attempt to qualify to make the 35-car field. Going home early would be Larry Richardson and Bob Kennedy. George Follmer started the race in Roger Penske's number 16 AMC Matador. He was fired the previous race from Bud Moore's number 15. He led the first lap and lost an engine after only 7 laps. Bobby Allison, Richard Petty, and Cal Yarborough would be the only other drivers to lead laps in this race. Riverside International Raceway was a 2.62-mile, 9-turn road course. Riverside was open from September 22, 1957 to July 2, 1989. The weekend the track opened, the first of 21 fatalities would occur. John Lawrence, in a California Sports Car Club event, would go off between turns 5 and 6, up a sand embankment, and roll back on the track. Initially, he survived the accident and only appeared slightly injured, but he passed away later at the hospital. The track was known as being a really dangerous track with a long downhill backstretch into a tight turn 9. With so many accidents and fatalities, the track was reconfigured in 1969 so it had a dogleg before turn 9. The track had 5 different configurations for all the different series of racing that would occur there. Ricky Rudd holds the track record on the NASCAR configuration. Qualifying for the 1988 Budweiser 400, Rudd turned a 1 minute 19.606 second lap. This was also the last NASCAR race held at the track and was won by Rusty Wallace. The track was modified and used for club events until it finally closed for good. In the final club event on July 1st, Mark Verbowski would lose his life at the track. Let's take a look at Richard Petty and his life and career. Richard Petty was born on July 2nd, 1937, is from Level Cross, North Carolina. Petty drove for the first time at 8 years old in a 1938 pickup truck that his uncle let him use for farm chores. Through much of his childhood, he helped his dad fix cars. He attended Randleman High School and was an all-conference guard on the football team. After he graduated, he took a business course at Greensboro Junior College and then started working at his dad's race team, Petty Enterprises. His racing career began 10 days after his 21st birthday on July 12, 1958, in Columbia, South Carolina, where he finished 6th. His NASCAR career began just 6 days later at CNE Stadium in Toronto, Ontario. Richard crashed after 55 laps, but finished 17th in his number 142 Oldsmobile. His dad Lee won that race in his number 42 Oldsmobile. His last race would be Jeff Gordon's first race on November 15th, 1992. Petty ended up 35th. Petty was actually in an accident earlier that race, but his crew worked to get his car back out. Petty pulled back on the track with 2 laps to go, but was credited with finishing his last ever Cup race. Petty retired with 200 wins, 555 top 5s, 712 top 10s, 123 poles, 307,836 laps, 51,514 laps led, 7 NASCAR championships, and 7 Daytona 500 wins. All those are not only just stats, but also NASCAR records held to this day, 31 years later. He also holds the records for most wins in the season, 27, most consecutive wins, 10, and most wins at Daytona, 10. He also has a list of awards and achievements. NASCAR Rookie of the Year, 1959, Motorsports Hall of Fame America, International Motorsports Hall of Fame, NASCAR Hall of Fame Class of 2010, Diecast Hall of Fame, one of NASCAR's 50th greatest drivers, and the Presidential Medal of Freedom. He was also Randolph County Commissioner from 1978 to 1994. He has also appeared in a number of movies, TV shows, and documentaries, including Cars, Cars 3, Days of Thunder, and Stroker Race, just to name a few. He also had a couple songs written about him. Alabama song, Richard Petty Fans, and his son, Kyle Petty's song, King Richard. Petty also recorded a few songs on the NASCAR Goes Country album. He was also commentator in 1995 for CBS and a race team owner for Petty Enterprises, Richard Petty Motorsports, Petty GMS Racing, and now remains as a team ambassador for the rebranded Legacy Motor Club. Petty also promised his mom not to collect money from alcohol sponsorship, so he never took money from the Bud Pole Award and only competed in the Busch Clash once in 1980. Petty also has a signature look, cowboy hat and sunglasses. The look is so iconic that it also inspired Bandit's look in the movie Smokey and the Bandit. 1958 was Richard Petty's first season in NASCAR. He raced 9 races for Petty Enterprises in a number 142, 42A, and 42. His best finish was 9th at Wall Stadium. 1959, Petty competed for Rookie of the Year honors, which he won. He started the season in the number 24 before running the rest of the year in the 43. His best finish was 2nd at Atlanta. 1960, he ran the 43 all season and got his first career win at Charlotte. He also won at Martinsville and Hillsboro. He captured his first and second career poles that season as well, both at Hillsboro. 1961 through 1966, he would win 45 races and collect 44 poles, 147 top 5s, 176 top 10s, 11,658 laps led, and win his first championship. 2 of these wins were in the 42, 6 wins were in the 41, and the rest were in the 43. 1965, Petty would only compete in 14 of the 55 races due to the Hemi engine being outlawed. He went drag racing instead. He raced a Barracuda with Outlawed on the door. In late February 1965, Petty would be involved in a fatal drag racing accident after crashing at Southeastern Dragway in Georgia, where an 8-year-old boy was killed and 7 others were injured. Afterwards, he would build a second Barracuda with 43 JR on the door. He was successful in drag racing, winning the Bristol Spring Nationals. Petty continued drag racing through the early 1966 season. 1967 was Richard Petty's most successful season, in his first season racing only in the number 43 car. He won 27 races, including 10 straight wins, 38 top 5s, 40 top 10s, 18 poles, and 5,543 laps led, and won his second championship. Just from this season alone, he would be 32nd on the all-time wins list. 1968 through 1977, Petty would win 110 races and have 249 top 5s, 282 top 10s, 58 poles, 29,796 laps led, and earned 4 championships. 1970 would also be the year that Petty would design the window net. After a bad crash in the Rebel 400 at Darlington, where Petty injured his arm and shoulder, he designed the window net to hold the driver in the car in case of a bad crash. 1978 was Petty's first winless season since he raced full-time. They just couldn't get the Dodge to handle right and ended up switching to Chevrolet at the end of the season. 1979 through 1981, Petty would race a Chevrolet, Oldsmobile, and Buick and earn 10 wins, 50 top 5s, 62 top 10s, 1 pole, and win his 7th and final championship in 1979. 1982 was Petty's next winless season. He had 5 second-place finishes and finished 5th in points. 1983, Petty earned 3 wins, 9 top 5s, 21 top 10s. 1984 and 1985, Petty left Petty Enterprises his father's team, and switched over to racing for Mike Hurt. Together they had 2 wins together, including Petty's 200th and final win at the 1984 Firecracker 400 in Daytona. They got 6 top 5s and 26 top 10s together. President Ronald Reagan was in attendance for Petty's 200th win. He was the first ever sitting president to attend a NASCAR race. After the race, President Reagan celebrated with the king and shared a bucket of KFC. 1986 through his final race in 1992, Petty would return to Petty Enterprises, besides one race in 1986. In the 1986 Coca-Cola 600, Petty crashed his 43 car in practice and was going to have to load up and go home and miss the race. D.K. Ulrich let Petty drive his number 6 car for the race. After 123 laps, the engine blew and Petty would end up 38th. His stats from 1986 through 1992, Petty would earn 14 top 5s, his last coming in 1988, 32 top 10s, his last coming in 1991, and a best finish of 8th in points in 1987. In addition to his Cup stats, he also raced 15 races in the NASCAR Convertible Series in 1958 and 1959, where he won 1 race, had 8 top 5s, and 10 top 10s. He ran the IROC Series from 1974 to 1978, and then again in 1989. He had 6 top 5s, 17 top 10s, and 4 laps led. Now let's take a look at Petty's crew chief, Dale Inman. Inman was born August 19, 1936, and is also from Level Cross, North Carolina. He is second cousins with Richard Petty, and grew up helping on Lee's race cars. He started his crew chiefing career in 1964 with Richard Petty. 1964 through 1969, they earned 74 wins, 167 top 5s, 188 top 10s, 66 poles, and 2 championships. 1970, Inman would crew chief for Pete Hamilton for 1 race at Darlington, finishing 19th. 1970 into 1981, Inman would be with Petty. Together they would have 92 wins, 238 top 5s, 274 top 10s, 41 poles, and 5 championships. 1981 and 1982, Inman would also work with Joe Ruttman and Tim Richmond. He scored 2 wins and a pole with Richmond and a total of 10 top 5s and 16 top 10s between both drivers in 40 races. 1983 and 1984, Inman worked with Terry Labonte, where they won 3 times and earned 28 top 5s, 44 top 10s, 5 poles, and a championship. That would be Inman's 8th and final championship as a crew chief. Inman would finish his career working with Richard Petty again through the 1986, 1987, and 1988 seasons. The final 3 years they had 14 top 5s and 30 top 10s. Petty Enterprises started in 1949, originally named Lee Petty Engineering. The first race was in 1949 with the 42 Plymouth of Lee Petty, and the final race was in 2008 with Bobby Labonte in the 43 and Chad McCumbee in the 45. Through 2,817 races, Petty Enterprises was able to win 268 races with 888 top 5s, 1,258 top 10s, 151 poles, and 10 championships, 3 with Lee and 7 with Richard. Other drivers besides Lee and Richard that won with Petty Enterprises include Jim Paschal, Marvin Panch, Pete Hamilton, Buddy Baker, Bobby Hamilton, and the final win coming in 1999 with John Andretti at Martinsville. Some notable drivers to race for Petty include Ralph Earnhardt, Tiny Lund, Bobby Myers, Joe Weatherly, Maurice Petty, Darrell Diringer, Dan Gurney, Kyle Petty, Morgan Shepherd, Adam Petty, Greg Biffle, Jerry Nadeau, both Labonte brothers, Terry and Bobby, Kenny Wallace, and Boris Said. Petty Enterprises was the winningest team for a long time, until Kyle Larson would score Hendrick Motorsports' 269th career win at the 2021 Coca-Cola 600. After the 2008 season, Petty Enterprises would combine with Evernham Gillette Motorsports and become Richard Petty Motorsports, which became Petty GMS Racing, and finally Legacy Motor Club, where Richard Petty is still the team ambassador, although he doesn't own the team anymore. Petty's famous 43 was first used in the 4th ever NASCAR race by Jack Russell, where he finished 42nd at Langhorne. As of this recording, it has been used in 2,000, 241 NASCAR Cup Series races, the most of any number, and was last used in 2023 at Phoenix by Eric Jones, where it finished 20th. Only 7 drivers have won in NASCAR history with the number: Lee Petty, Richard Petty, Jim Paschal, Bobby Hamilton, John Andretti, Eric Almirola, and Eric Jones. Some notable drivers to race this number include Lee's brother, Julian Petty, Bob Ross, probably not the famous painter, Maurice Petty, Leroy Yarbrough, Darrell Diringer, Kyle Petty, Wally Dallenbach Jr., Jeff Green, Reed Sorensen, A.J. Allmendinger, Regan Smith, and Bubba Wallace. Richard Petty's longtime sponsor, STP, has sponsored cars in 978 Cup Series races. They first sponsored Fred Lorenzen and Dave Marcus's number 99 in 1971, then went with Richard Petty in 1972 through his last race in 1992. Through those years, they also sponsored Kyle Petty, James Hilton, and Buddy Baker. They went to victory lane with Richard Petty 60 times. They also won with Buddy Baker in his Petty Enterprises number 11 once. After Petty retired, STP remained a sponsor for Petty Enterprises and Richard Petty Motorsports, sponsoring Rick Wilson, Jimmy Hensley, Wally Dallenbach Jr., John Andretti, Bobby Hamilton, Jeff Green, Bobby Labonte, A.J. Allmendinger, Eric Almirola, Bubba Wallace, and Eric Jones. They went to victory lane 3 more times after Petty retired, twice with Bobby Hamilton and once with John Andretti, both in the number 43 car. That's all for this week. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Check out the episode on YouTube to see pictures that go along with this episode, and like and subscribe. And on Instagram, follow Random NASCAR Driver Podcast. Come back next episode to learn about Winchester Speedway and Leo Caldwell.